Welcome to this episode of A Conversation With, presented to you by Positive Regard. My name is Jacob, and I'm joined today by Emma, a mainstream primary principal, and Anne-Marie, an SEMH school principal, who will both be sharing their experiences on becoming trauma aware. Feel free to engage with us online. Hope you enjoy. All right, I've got Emma and Anne-Marie here with me, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat about what it means to be trauma aware and talk a little bit about their journey, getting to that place and beyond. So I think it'll be useful for us to get to know you a little bit. For the people that don't know, I've had the privilege of working quite closely with both of you, and I know how amazing you are, but I think it'll be useful for us to just get a little bit of context, where you're working, where you've previously worked, other stuff like that. So a little bit of an introduction. Shall I come to you first, Anne-Marie? Is that okay?
Yeah, hi everybody. Currently I'm working as an associate principal at Springwell Academy Leeds, Southside, which is an SEMH through school, special school for children with social, emotional, and mental health needs. But I've always felt drawn towards working with vulnerable people. I actually had no intentions of going into education. I started off working in dance theatre, touring around the country and delivering workshops in dance and drama. And the company that I worked for originally used to get various different types of work. And so every time a piece of work came in that was working, for example, in prisons or with youth offenders, I was like, please, can I have that piece of work? Please, can I have that piece of work? And I became really drawn and interested because I like to challenge. I've always liked to challenge. And so I wanted to work with a part of the community that other people went, oh, you're never going to get them. You're never going to get those prisoners dancing. Never. And I was kind of like, do you want to bet? So that's what drew me to that group of people, and then basically I became less interested in the dance and drama. I became to realise when I started working in SEMH settings is that it was all about relationships. So I could essentially deliver anything, teach anything to anyone as long as I had a relationship, and the more of the challenge the relationship was for me, the more I was infused by it. I've always worked in the SEMH strand. So that's a little bit about me and my background.
Oh, thanks for that. That's wicked. I didn't realise that you'd worked in prisons and stuff. That's really cool. It's interesting about that challenge as well, isn't it? I really like that. Emma, do you mind introducing yourself a little bit so people can just get a little bit more knowledge about you?
Absolutely, yeah. Unlike Anne-Marie, I've always been in education, definitely never a dancer. That's not a forte of mine in any way, shape or form. I always worked in education, in primary education, and always, like Anne-Marie, felt that relationships absolutely made the difference, but just didn't know the science behind it really. So started out as a primary classroom practitioner, moved on to different leadership roles, and somehow ended up as a head teacher. And then was really lucky, incredibly lucky to work with the two of you at Springwell in Leeds, an SEMH provision, which taught me everything, kind of the science underpinning everything that I'd always believed. And then from there, with Wellspring, came over to be executive principal of Lacey Field, my favourite place in the whole world. So yeah, a very different story to Anne-Marie's, but with actually a similar theme with regards to relationships. And it was always me who got those children in my class that might need that little bit more time to build that relationship. I've got a background in SEN. I was a SENCO for years. So very different but similar theme.
Thank you. I'm interested to ask a question to you both. What was it that drew you to education in the first place? What was it that drew you to teaching in the first place? I know for me, and this isn't about me at all, but for me it was a particular person, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Why education? And you could choose to work anywhere, couldn't you? You know, and both your enthusiasm shine through whenever we're working together. But why, in the first instance, did you choose education?
I think for me it was it's making a difference. You know, part of the Academy Trust that I work for at the moment, Wellspring Academy Trust, you know, talk about making a difference. That's what's brought me to this place. And I wanted to do the piece of work that most people don't want to do. I mean, you'll know yourselves as practitioners, but you'll talk to family and friends, and no one can really get their head around about why you're so passionate in this area and why you want to do that piece of work. But I want to do the bits of work that most people don't want to do. I want to be that difference maker.
Yeah, wicked. Thank you.
If you ask my friends and family, they'll tell you it's because I was bossy when I was younger. And like to boss people around. I had my sister at 5 learning French. It was just what I wanted to do. I genuinely can't tell you. I just knew I wanted to be a teacher. There was never anything else. A real lovely mentor of mine who I worked with both as a child and then as a student teacher passed away not long ago. And when I reflect on him and how he's influenced my life, it was probably, you know, partly him, because I just wanted to be a teacher like him. I wanted to be the teacher you remembered, that was there for you, both academically and in a relational sense. And yeah, it was a no-brainer. It was education. That was it.
Thank you for sharing those. And with risk of being too personal now, I want to know what your personal view is on being trauma aware. What does it mean to you to be trauma aware? I don't know. We'll probably come across the science maybe on a little bit later on. So that's not necessarily what I'm asking. I'm asking them personally, what does it mean to you to be trauma aware?
I think growing up as a child, you know, I had adverse childhood experiences, me and myself and my siblings, and my sister impacted on a lot more than me, and was actually excluded from school, so didn't have an education, spent some time in care. So I think there was a point for me where I was always kind of reflecting. I had there's a kind of a learned response from society that that it's all about your upbringing, it's all about your parenting, and I kind of like used to sit and reflect and kind of go, well, myself and my sister, 18 months between us, had the same experiences, but it impacted us both in different ways. So I saw the potential impact on people and their lives going forward firsthand, and I was able to obviously take a different path, and so I think personally, and again it's back to that education question, want to get in there early. I want to provide the interventions, provide the love and support, provide what people need to ensure that they can have the best pathways in life.
Awesome. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, both of you. Anne-Marie, obviously you'll have a bit of time while Emma answers the question I'm asking about being trauma aware, but Emma, you'll have to multitask and think about your answer to this question while you're giving this one. Sorry. I want you to see if you could sum up what being trauma aware is in a couple of words or a sentence.
Okay, I think I could possibly finish this bit with that.
Yes. So again, without putting you on the spot too much, what does it mean personally to you, Emma, to be trauma aware? Yeah.
For me, when I went into education, without knowing any of the science, without knowing any of the psychology, any of the stuff that we know now, I just wanted to enable children to be the best version of themselves. For me, now I know everything, trauma awareness, trauma informed, whatever you want to call it, let's not professionalize it. It's about being non-judgmental, it's about unconditional positive regard. And it's just about, you know, being curious about people and what will make them tick and what will help them to realize their dreams, to change the cycle that they're in, to support them and to challenge them to be better with their lives. You know, for me, it's not about professionalizing it. It's about being curious, non-judgmental, and that unconditional positive regard.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I'll take that as your little summary as well. I love those. Yeah, wicked. Do you think you could sum that up, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I would come to that word as well, curious. I think that plays a big part in it. But I think it's for me, it's about understanding that previous experiences need to be understood to understand the actions of people in front of you. So people that you face day to day in front of you, you need to see the context of that. You need to understand that what they're trying to communicate through their behaviour, through their actions, is absolutely seeped in their previous experience, and that's not separate, it's interlinked.
Absolutely, and I think the thing we haven't touched on is empathy, and that ability to empathise and put yourself in those shoes and not try and fix, just be there, and then the curiosity comes in. I think it's what we talk about with PACE, playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, empathy. That's for me the way that you approach this philosophy.
I think that's a really nice way of framing it as well, in a sense of what you said about not professionalizing it. I think that's a really accessible way of describing what being trauma aware might be. I can only apologize for putting you both on the spot, and it was something that I thought I'd try and see what you came out with, just as to what you might, and they were lovely, really, really nice examples, so thank you for that. I suppose it'd be interesting now to sort of define trauma, or trauma awareness and things like that. And is there a difference between being trauma informed, trauma perceptive, and trauma aware? And maybe touch on a little bit of what your understanding of what trauma actually is. I know you've mentioned science a little bit. I know none of us are neuroscientists, to my knowledge anyway. I'm definitely not. But I'm a massive advocate of understanding what's going off inside the brain and body. And I know you guys really like to look at that as well. So I'd be interested to see what your understanding of trauma as an actual thing is.
There's a line that me and Anne-Marie use in the training that we did in Leeds, put science into the hands of the masses and they will create very wise actions. And that sort of summed up everything that we talked about when we did the training in Leeds. Do you want to take this one, Anne-Marie? Or?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'll just start before I answer it by saying to people listening, the theory, the science and the theory that we all know about, because it excites us. Yeah, so we read up on it and we learn, and the science is out there, but you don't have to know the science, and you don't have to know the theory to understand the concept, if that makes sense. So I just kind of want to put that out there first.
I think that's a really important point, because when sometimes you support people with some of the things that we're discussing in a higher level, it can be overwhelming. It can be a little bit, whoa, what you're talking about, neuroplasticity and all these different chemicals inside the body, and I don't even know my left from my right. So I think that's a really important point, that actually, and linking into how you said about not professionalizing, Emma, I think that's a really, really nice point to make before you go forward.
Well, that's exactly right, because we're not, as you said, we're not neuroscientists. We're not professionals, if you like. For me, it's about being human. It's that human curiosity. But in terms of the bits and pieces that we talk about with the science, it's the go-to is ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. They are something that we talk about a lot in our training. In the resilience movie they talked about, which is a cracking movie if you haven't seen it, and it's about what's happened in that child's life and what blueprint has been left for them that may then mean that their fight, flight, freeze response is, I don't want to say different, but it happens more quickly, or in situations that it wouldn't for other people. There could be triggers that we wouldn't recognise as triggers for ourselves. But again, that's why it's about being human and being curious for those people. Yeah. And it's not just about children, it's about adults as well. So as leaders in schools, it's actually about, understanding, where our staff have come from as well.
Yeah, I think if I was going to kind of just put it in really like black and white, Anne-Marie terms, the adverse childhood experiences that Emma just described damage the brain. They can damage the brain. We know that. As I say, the science tells us that. there's some great images out there. We can look at the brain. You can look at a brain of a child that's had, for example, abuse in their life, that's had adverse childhood experiences, in comparison to a brain of somebody who hasn't, and look at the pathways that are underdeveloped, look at the size of the brain that's smaller. So what we know is that whereas a physical illness, damage to physical outer exterior can be seen, trauma is something that exists. We know that, that's factual, but can't always be seen so readily. And in terms of that definition of being trauma aware, trauma informed, myself and Emma were lucky enough to go on a conference where we heard Dr. Karen Treisman really beautifully summarize this. And she talks about a river, a free-flowing river. And at the start of that river, it's about being trauma aware. And probably the people listening to this will be at that place on that river, because they're becoming aware that trauma is a thing, that trauma impacts people. And then it's about being trauma informed, so allowing your information you know about trauma to start to inform yourself and your way of doing things. And then it's about being trauma responsive, which is kind of the ultimate part. But you're never at one place on that river, and you never reach a final destination. It's free flowing. So that was a nice terminology to describe people's journeys, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's about a just cause, isn't it? It's about the greater good. And for me, I think the one thing that you've got to remember with anything to do with trauma awareness, it is a journey. And, you know, whoever you are working with, the trauma doesn't define them. We can do something. The line we always use is that every interaction is an intervention. It's a Karen Treisman line. I use it all the time. I usually mess it up, actually. But that's the line we use, you know, and that's the not professionalising it bit again. It's about the fact that, you know, just being there, keeping that child, that adult in mind, and being human. But just absolutely know that it's not the end. And I think the thing we've not talked about as well is the fact that we constantly talk about mental and physical health being separate, but the body doesn't separate them. So those things that have impacted our mental health, you know, could impact our physical health as well. So this absolutely is something that all educators and everybody working in this sector should be aware of. At least aware.
I agree, and thank you so much for sort of going over the details in such a really accessible way. I've got a really nice quote that I always forget about that'll hopefully summarize some of the things that you've just been talking about. Literally just been like trying to dig it out really subtly, so hopefully you didn't notice that. But it is: experience shapes brain structure, experience is biology, how we treat our children changes who they are and how they will develop. And that's a Dan Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel. That's something that he said. I think that's a really nice way just to summarize some of the things that you were touching on.
You've mentioned that one to our staff at Lacey Field, and that's one that stuck.
Yeah, I also, just on top of what you were saying about being human and sort of the small interactions, I remember us being really fortunate enough to go and watch Dr. Bruce Perry, which was quite a while ago now. And one of the things that I picked up about some of the things that he said in that specific session, and some of the other people that were there, which were amazing, was the small interactions outweigh the really intensive stuff. So the little things, which is basically the quote from Karen, and it just sticks with me because it was him and I was all excited. But also just in terms of how the little things have the big impact across the board, you know, having the right culture, everybody being on board, and just those little interactions. Yes, obviously the sort of strategic targeted interventions are invaluable, but the way you described the smaller interactions having an impact just really stuck with me.
I think that's why it's about being a trauma responsive academy or school or whatever you want to be. It's about being trauma informed across the board. So it's a ripple effect. It's got to be that as an executive principal, I love and look after my team so that they can love and look after their children. And it's about being trauma aware for your staff as well. So for me, he's exactly right, because if we model the model, then that's got to have that impact across the board. It's got to ripple out all the way to the community, for me, in my opinion.
I suppose it's a really nice segue into one of the other questions I wanted to ask you, which was about your personal journey. So we've talked a little bit about why you started in education, what your thoughts are, personal thoughts and feelings were around trauma, and some of the light theory, if you like, around it. But I'd be really interested. You've mentioned a few names, and obviously I've just mentioned we were lucky enough to go and see Bruce, and you've mentioned a course that you've both been parts of delivering as well. I'd be interested to see where you sort of, what your path or your plot or your journey river looks like individually. What sparked your interest in this? I know you've touched on that briefly, but and then some of the things that you've done. I think people appreciate, a bit more detail on some of the things that you've gone through personally. But then I'll ask you the question after about your teams as well, because we're in different places, so there might be slight differences. Feel for whoever wants to go for it, go for it.
Yeah, so my pivotal point was in a previous school where I was baffled by a child's unpredictable response to seemingly no trigger. Basically, I saw a young man who just suddenly punched a key worker in the face, and we spent ages kind of debriefing and trying to figure out what caused it. And it was a counselling psychologist that I worked with that sat down and was talking to me, and he was talking about trauma, and this boy had suffered significant trauma and abuse, and the fact that he was living in what I now term shark infested waters, where he was on hyper vigilant, hyper alert all the time. And it might have been a smell, it might have been a sound in the background that no one else will have heard, but took him back to that fight, flight and freeze response. So that was the first kind of moment where someone had talked to me about what I was seeing translated before me as an impact of trauma that he suffered in the early years of his life. So I just, I'm curious, as we've talked about before, and I always wanted to understand more about the behaviour of the children that I was working with, and so that naturally led me to read and learn more and seek out information about trauma. I think what sparks action is when you meet with like-minded people. So Emma and I cross paths working in Leeds. Both didn't realise that we both signed up for the same conference that we were talking about. And then we were in conversation, and I said, I'm going to this conference, and Emma said, I'm going to this conference. And so we were on the same conference, and obviously watching the Resilience movie, as Emma has said before, it talks about getting the science in the hands of the population in order to create action. And I felt very strongly at that moment, leaving that conference and talking to Emma, that this wasn't just something you go on, you learn about, and you kind of, okay, that's improved my practice. This is about our duty to our society, to the community, that we are a voice, and collectively there are lots of people like us who are willing to put themselves out there and make a difference. So we were passionate that we wanted, firstly, every one of our staff members to watch the Resilience movie and have that same spark that we did. We then, Emma approached me and said, what about taking this further? What about taking this across the authority? What about inviting social workers, police, community groups? Let's get that Resilience movie out there. Absolutely, the spark had started, the fire was ignited. So we just tried to get that message and that Resilience movie out there to as many people as we possibly could. And then for me, once that was out there, it was kind of, okay, so what next? Now we've got lots of people who are feeling like we're feeling, excited by this and the difference that they can make. So we put on some leadership workshops for people who wanted to take it a step further. again, all, voluntarily, from our perspective, and said, if you want to think about how you can develop this way of working in your organisation, we'll support you. We'll run workshop days, and we'll look at how you can develop action, and we'll give you examples of what we've done. So that was the external. And then internally, again, I was really conscious that it couldn't be me driving our trauma-informed practice across Springwell, Leeds and 3 sites. It's not a one-person job, it's a way of being, it's a culture shift. So I basically asked for volunteers, for everybody who had seen the Resilience movie, and said, is there anybody who wants to be part of that movement? And had lots of volunteers. I was overwhelmed by how many people put their name forward. From that, formed a working group, and we looked at some key areas like the physical environment, staff wellbeing, recruitment and induction, vision, values and attitudes, etc. And we basically evaluated what we currently got in place. So we went and had a look and reevaluated and thought, where are we with that? And then we set actions. So as a collective, we formulated an action plan that has seen us over the last 24 months develop our own practice. And now we're at a point where, all of our staff are well informed around trauma and its impact and what they can do to help. And it's, for example, any new starter coming into the organisation, as part of their induction, watches the Resilience movie and has a session on what trauma is, how to work in a trauma-informed way, and what action they can take. So that's a lot summarised in a short space of time.
That's wicked. That's a lot. It's really nice to hear that from sort of spark to where you are now. And I know you've said that you're not at the end of that journey, which is important. So it's really nice to hear where you're up to and the things that have got you to the place that you're at. Thank you for that. No pressure, Emma. I know some of the things are going to cross over because Anne-Marie's mentioned you quite a bit in there, but I'd be interested to hear your personal journey along that river, and also how your team's journey has gone as well, or is going. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it. It's a case of, it is a journey. I know I've bored you with this, Jacob. I've just listened to the podcast by Brene Brown and Simon Sinek about infinite mindset, and that just summarise it completely. It's about a just cause, and this is, of all the causes, this is just, changing the lives of the tiny humans and the big humans. It's amazing. In terms of my journey, as I said, it was way back when. It was always a case that I was really intrigued, would be the word, by these children who needed that relational support. And let's face it, with primary age children, if they care about you, they'll do the learning. That's the way it works. So building a relationship with children was absolutely the crux of the starting point of my career. But for me, when my trauma-informed journey, because of the science, started, it was when I became head teacher at my first school, and I worked with Dr. Kate Margerson, and she just managed to frame my thinking and make me realise what it was that I was actually trying to do in kind of a scientific way. I still didn't truly understand it, I'm not going to lie. But I suppose that was the start of the journey for me, where my awareness started. But I think the pivotal moment for me was seeing children and the number of children being off-rolled and excluded. We know that shame and exclusion causes physical pain in children. That that's something that they feel. There was some research done, Mary Meredith talks about in her podcast. And for me, that was the point where I just thought, no, we're doing this wrong. Something's going wrong. If we're excluding 4-year-olds, what on earth is going wrong in the system? And I am crazy enough to think that we can change the world. So that was the starting point, really. And I was lucky enough not long after that to join you guys. And I watched in awe. When I started at Springwell, I just gobsmacked watching the practitioners with their patience, their curiosity, their support, their unconditional positive regard. That team still, for me, they're right in my heart, because they just were incredible. And Simon Sinek talks about your kind of invisible team that's always out there. And I feel like the Springwell guys are my invisible team. They're always there cheering me on, and I'm cheering them on as well. And at that point, for me, it was about, well, if it works here, how could that look in mainstream? And as that happened, this job came up, and I applied, and I was brave, and I got it. So then it was, right, we've got something special here. I knew the teams in these schools. They are amazing people, and we believe in a done with culture here. So it was about, right, let's start with our why. Let's do the Simon Sinek thing. Let's start with our why, our how, then our what. Let's build a mission together. And just sort of to frame the journey, we then came up with our mission. Our why is to create the best version of everybody and to achieve optimum happiness and success for learning and life. That's the why. That's what we want to do. That's the just cause. Our mission is the kids know that we're busy being brilliant, and we do it through our behaviours for learning. So we've got like our values, our behaviours for learning: to be kind, to be brave, to be on the team, to be in charge of me, to be grateful, and to be curious. So that's it. That's Lacey Field in a snapshot. And I think what was really interesting when I was listening to you, Anne-Marie, we did all that work in Leeds, and in one way you could think the pandemic kind of stalled it, but I think actually, this has been a horrendous and difficult year for everybody. But now more than ever, a trauma-informed, a trauma-aware, a relational approach, being human, is needed. So I think, in terms of the just cause we had, it's more needed now than ever, in my opinion.
Thank you. Wow, another wow. Just brilliant. Honestly, it's so refreshing to hear two continuing journeys that involve so much with and so much working as a collective on the same wavelength and with people that are, like you've said, like-minded. Quite often a lot of things are done to people, or you get, like Anne-Marie, you said, you get on that course and it's something that might impact on your day-to-day practice. This is a bigger picture thing, isn't it? And like you said about impacting on society, and again linking to what you've just closed with, Emma, about the way the world is at the moment, even more so, this stuff is definitely needed. I thought it'd be really interesting to look at this through a few different lenses. I know we previously spoke about how does this look through the eyes of a child? So in your environment, what does somebody either at the bottom of the school, Emma, or at the top, or Anne-Marie, again, that looks slightly different in your setting with it being through school, but what does that look like for a pupil that steps into your building on a day-to-day basis? What does being trauma aware look like through the eyes of a child?
I think it's safety is the first thing I would say. That word springs to mind straight away. We create safe spaces for young people, and they haven't always been in places, and sometimes even within their family home they haven't been safe. They're not going to instantly feel safe. Lots and lots of relational work from us, and it's about trauma is linked to the work around attachment, and I'm not going to go into kind of attachment theory now, but as an attachment lead myself and developing my own practice within my school, luckily I've got a team who absolutely believe, like me, that we will not give up, we will not reject. And what's happened, unfortunately, in their lives before is that is exactly what's happened when the going gets tough, when they need people most. People turn around and say, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you anymore. Exclusion's a typical response to that. So from a child's perspective, it's creating a sense of safety and never giving up.
I'm really interested in that word, safety. Do you mind if I ask you to just elaborate on that a little bit? What does that mean, again, for a pupil, but for just in school? How do you create safety, felt safety? And is it just, making the room, making sure things are out of the way? What does it mean for you and for Springwell? What does that come across as?
I think it's a value, it's a core value that underpins everything that we do. You talked about the physical environment, we can talk about the curriculum, we can talk about policy, procedure. at the heart of all of it is asking ourselves the question, will it help children to feel safe? So, for example, one of the mechanisms we've got is to introduce for children that have suffered attachment needs a key adult, sometimes 2 key adults, so that they've got, in a world with lots of adults who they might mistrust naturally, they've got 1 or 2 key people who will work hard at building that relationship and be somebody that they can learn, that they can go to.
Thank you. They're great examples. I just wanted to pull those from you, if you like, just to share some of the amazing things that you do. Does that look different in your school, Emma? Are there other things that look from a view of a child that, what it looks like from their perspective?
It's interesting because that was one of the tasks that we used to ask delegates to do when they came to, colleagues to do when they used to come and see us and look at the resilience movie and do some of the work with us. So do you know what? It doesn't look all that different, because I am working with my team to try and create something that's basically stolen bits from you guys. So for us, we talk a lot with the staff about enabling the children when they walk in to answer the question, enabling their bodies to answer the question, am I safe? Am I loved? Right, thinking brain on, just thinking about the flip model of the brain. So we begin our day with a nurture breakfast, just like you guys do over at Springwell. It is a time for children to sit down with adults and set themselves up for the day, sort out Maslow's hierarchy, feed them, make them feel loved, make them feel safe, water them. And then from there, it's relentless routines, which is something that you've worked with us on, Jacob. It is a case of our children know what to expect. And for those children who have experienced trauma, that's hugely important, because they need to know what's going to happen in that day. So they're kind of the 2 things that you definitely see. I think the other thing that we really hang our hat on here at Lacey Field is talk and sort of social capital, enabling our children to be articulate and to be able to communicate their needs, their wants, their wishes, their feelings without conflict. I think that's hugely important for children and adults, actually. And that's modelled by the staff in the way they use language. One of the things that I absolutely love telling people is that I don't love telling people this, but this academy had the highest rate of exclusion before we became Lacey Field. And with the difference in approach, we've actually completely there's been no exclusion since. Because I'd like to think that our children and our staff feel included, safe and loved. And the language that teachers and professionals now use isn't, he's ever so naughty. It's actually, and this kid is really dysregulated. Can you just come and help me? Because I've done everything that I can think of. I've tried all the regulation tricks that you've taught us, but I need a bit of help with this. And that's just incredible. That shift from naughty to dysregulated, it is just incredible. So I think it's about flipping that narrative.
I'm a massive advocate of reframing, and that's exactly what you've just done, isn't it? I think that's really powerful. If you change the way that you describe something, you'll change the way that you approach that thing.
Getting away from the fact that adults have to be right, and because a child's done something, and the adult needs something in return. It makes no sense. What we're trying to do is to model to children how to be decent humans. So for me, punishment doesn't make sense, because it's punitive, it's negative, it's teaching them that you do something bad, you get something bad, and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think just so that we're not crossing over too much, Emma, do you mind just saying what it looks like from a perspective of a parent then? So if we're looking through the eyes of a parent, and then we'll cross back over to you, Anne-Marie, if that's okay. Yeah,
a culture shift always needs to be handled carefully, I think, in terms of parents, because at the end of the day, it's their tiny humans that they're sending in. And I know when I think about my nephew going into school, it is like a piece of your heart is walking into that school. So for me, it's about communication. So for our parents, we did have some parents asking why there was no longer detention, why there was no longer, phone calls home constantly about the negative behaviours. But what combated that, I think, is the fact that we were visible as a team. Myself and the leaders go out on the gates every morning. We meet and greet a lot like Springwell. So it's a meet and greet. It's that, that positive start to the day. So by the time a child and a parent have done this walk to school, they've probably been greeted by 3 different members of the school team who are smiling, who are happy to see them, you know, who make them feel safe and loved. And I think, like I say, it's about communication. So we've constantly put out newsletters, especially through the pandemic, a letter nearly every week. We've now even gone to doing video letters. So I'll write the letter, but then I'll do a video of what the content of the letter is, because sometimes it's just easier to digest when you hear it. Because I'm not seeing parents now, because at the minute the school is closed. So yeah, in terms of parents, I think it's about being human again. It's not about us in school being right and parents being wrong. It's about us working together for that just cause, helping our children to become the best version of themselves.
Thank you. Anne-Marie, what does it look like through the lens of a parent in your environment? Is there differences, similarities?
Some of the same things that I said about the children. I think this is where, you know, you look at different groups of people, and it's very much a lot of the same. So for our parents, their children have been rejected lots of times in educational establishments. And when they come to us, they're expecting, based on their learned experiences, that they're going to get telephone calls from us, and their children sent home most days, and then probably an exclusion, then probably have to find another school, because unfortunately that's been their lived experience. So for us, it's building trust, and letting them know that the school's a safe place and that we are experts, and that we will love them, and we will not be giving up. We're their forever school once they join us. And talking to the parents and the families about their backgrounds, about the adverse childhood experiences that their child might have faced. So talking to them delicately about their birth story, and helping them to understand that might be why we're seeing some of the things that we're seeing, actually, you know, when they're puzzled and wondering why they behave in the ways that they do, that actually we start to join up some of those lines, families, and then just reassuring them that we will break down barriers. So all the children have got different barriers, but we're there to work with the family, and one barrier at a time, start to knock them down, and we're committed to that.
Yeah, and I think it's about that. You guys are really good at unconditional positive regard, and I think it's about that for the parents as well, because if we are going to help the child, shaming a parent is never going to help. So that idea that we talk to our parents without judgment, and we just build that relationship with them, I think is massively important.
I suppose the last two that would be worth just touching on would be from a teacher or a leader's perspective. So either of you feel free to jump in, but I'd like you to try and obviously put yourself in the shoes of your team and see what they see through their eyes, in terms of trauma awareness in your environment.
This is an area that I'm really passionate about, and I've done a lot of research into, because of the complexities of our working environment, and the amount of trauma that our staff are dealing with on a day-to-day basis through the pupils. You know, I've done a lot of kind of reading around secondary traumatic stress disorder, and you know, there's no doubt that the work that they do with our children does impact directly on staff. So some of the things that we've got in place are a well ingrained restorative way of working, using things like debriefs to be able to always kind of unpick the whys, the being the curious that we talked about, that every staff member has a self-care plan in my school, that they're the author of, and particularly about when they become dysregulated. You know, they need to be regulated to support the young people with their trauma and their displays of emotion.
I really like the way you described that, the author of their own self-care plan. That's lovely. Sorry. Yeah.
And you know, our staff are not very good at sometimes identifying that they need to take some time to look after themselves. So it's about peer to peer, being able to say, you need to go and you know, whatever's written in their self-care plan, go and have a walk around the block. You need to go and have that can of Coke Zero. You know, so it's about looking after each other in terms of the self-care plans. We've also invested heavily this academic year in which, you know, I've been wanting to do for a while, in counselling for staff, to support them with not only the children's trauma that they're taking on, but their own trauma in their own lives. And obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, and people have trauma all around them. In terms of leaders, just as a, you know, the same, leaders are part of the staff team, but I'll just go back to a point that you both made and reiterate that about reframing the use of language and modeling that all the time. So what we're not doing is kind of direct challenge there and then. If somebody says, for example, oh, you know, Joe Bloggs was absolutely awful today, you know, I don't care about anyone or anything, and he's and etc. The person listening to that needs to be modeling and saying, yeah, Joe Bloggs is having a really tough day today, isn't he? Struggling with something. We need to do our best to try and help him. So it's like, it's constantly modeling the language, because, as I said, it's a part of the culture, being trauma aware.
It definitely has power, doesn't it? That language and reframing, I think, and that's a great example of how, in a crisis situation or post a crisis situation, for a member of staff, simply reframing something can completely change the way that thing is, you know, is supported or planned around, viewed, felt about, all of those things. Is that similar to yours, Emma, in terms of, you know, teachers and leaders?
Yeah, I think we talk a lot as leaders about teachers and their perspective, really in terms of the, you know, the external pressures, and trying to create a place where the noise is taken away and any kind of government pressure and things are taken away. Because for years, teaching, it's been about, you know, going into a classroom and teachers get judged. We're trying to flip that, and we're creating a celebratory model where we go into classrooms and it's all about celebration. So for me, my hope is that our teachers feel that they have got SLT as cheerleaders, that when we look at the classrooms and we look at the work that we do, it's celebratory. You know, we always talk about the 7 to 1 model. So 7 positive, amazing things to one thing that might not be, but we try not to talk about the not be's, because if you celebrate the great stuff gets better. So I would hope that they feel well in order to support our children. That's, again, the ripple effect. You know, I need to be well to support my leaders need to be well to support my teachers need to be well to support children and families. I think on a day-to-day basis, that probably looks like loads of chocolate in the staff room, because I'm an absolute feeder. But it's how I show I care. So, but yeah, very similar to what you said, Anne-Marie, you know, because obviously this is mainstream, there hasn't maybe always been that focus on relational, restorative, trauma aware, neurosequential model, neurokind training. So I think it's about giving them the science and the tools, the actual tools. You know, blowing bubbles might help a child regulate. Blowing a balloon up might help a child regulate. Offering them a hopping race might help a child get back into a classroom, and about, you know, just moving away from the rules. We've got a real ethos of peer support as well, so teachers know that they've got each other's backs. That was a theme of all the conversations that I've had over the last week. And again, like you, there's a counselling therapy offer for all of my staff on a request basis from an external Fortis therapy, and there's also leadership coaching for all of my leaders. So for me, that's how it looks, and I'm hopeful that that's one of the reasons why I can feel something wonderful and something magic when I'm in the building.
It's interesting you've both outlined the working with a lot in the ways that you've just talked about, all of those different perspectives, and also finishing off with counselling and talking. I think that's really interesting as well, alongside the reframing that we've all mentioned throughout. I suppose to close, I think it'd be really interesting. We've done really well at not sort of going anywhere near the I've got to play devil's advocate, I think, at this point, and just say, well, if I'm a cynic and I don't believe in any of this, what does that look like, and what do we do to support those people? I'm fairly confident I know what your answers are going to be. They'll be very similar to all the things that you've described already, but I'm kind of just want to go through that process just to show that we work quite often. I, in my role, definitely come across people that don't believe, if you want to say it like that. So I think I'd be interested to see what your thoughts are on the cynics, on the view from the other side, all that sort of stuff. Punishments are the way forwards.
Oh, don't get me started. Jake, no, I'm going to be like really brief and just say, what harm can be done. This is an approach for all. It's not about those small group of children, let's say, if we're talking about a school context. It's not about we do something different for them to support their trauma. And if someone hasn't had any adverse childhood experience or trauma, then we'll do something different. This is a culture changer. This is something that's for everybody. And, I'd ask the question back to them about what harm can be done. Think about what harm could come out of that. Surely, there are no harmful aspects of loving, understanding, providing safety, all the key things that we've talked about. There aren't negative connotations with those things.
Thank you. Emma, have you got any thoughts on any of that? I kind of want to set you off just to get you ranting, both of you, but you're doing really well.
Without sweat, no. For me, it's about, for the cynics, about getting them to think about what they'd want for their families. These children that we work with, you exclude, what happens? If it was your family, what would you want? If it was the people you loved, what would you want for them? Because exclusion just causes a feeling of physical pain, a feeling of isolation. And there is a different way we can do it. And actually, for the cynics, it makes economical good sense. We would save so much money in the justice system, in the NHS system, in mental health, if we just got it right for the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6-year-olds. If we just work with families, if we just be unconditionally positive regarding all the time, and just think about it, about the people that the people that you love, how would you want them to be treated?
Perfect.
I would just add probably as well that the difference kind of going forward is in the change makers. Us three are change makers. It takes individual people to speak out loud, to be confident, and to say, I'm going to make a difference. So you can always focus on yourself and what you can impact on, because it will make a difference. Even if you feel thwarted by those around you that have got, even within my own circle of family and friends, I have people who think very differently, but that just makes me more determined than ever to make a difference.
Thank you. I suppose just want to ask if you've got any closing thoughts, anything that you want to share or finish off with. I've really, really enjoyed talking to you both. It's been fascinating listening to your journeys and the things that you've sort of been through. Anything that you want to share or finish off with people?
I always finish with the same thing. Emma knows what I'm going to say, and we've said it loads of times in this, but I have to finish on it every time. In every interaction is an intervention.
Thank you.
It's just exactly what you've said, Anne-Marie. It's about being human. It's about being curious, and it's about just wanting a better version for our children, our families, and our staff.
Thank you. I thought I saw you share something the other day, and I thought I recognised that, and it's from somebody that works with us. A quote that I think would be nice to finish with. It was, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And I just think, you know what, Margaret Mead, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I just, thank you both for you giving up your time today, and I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And if anybody's interested, getting in touch with either of these two people, I'm sure they wouldn't mind. I'll make sure that the links to their Twitters and email addresses are within that. So thank you, and see you later.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thanks.